and welcome to the Texas Talks podcast. I'm your host, Brad Swail. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Brian Phillips, the Chief Communications Officer at the nonprofit, nonpartisan research institute, the Texas Public Policy Foundation, a foundation whose mission is to promote and defend liberty, personal responsibility, and free enterprise in Texas and the nation. Brian, how are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me over to talk about this.
I'm excited to talk to you. It's I've talked to, obviously, James Quintero has been on the show, and some other. I've talked to other people at TPPF before.
Oh man, I hope he took hazard pay talking to that guy.
James Quintero? Yeah, they don't. They didn't warn me about that beforehand, but I've actually interviewed him. I don't know, maybe 4 times now. Maybe
Did you get a
5
word
times?
in? Did he just talk the whole time?
He's always welcome back, James. If you're listening to this, I love you. You're great. So I gave a pretty brief intro about you and TPPF there. TPPF is very well known, but just in case, if you want to give some more background on you and TPPF, that'd be great.
Sure. Organization TPPF, Texas Public Policy Foundation, is the largest state-based think tank in the country. We're probably the second largest just think tank in the country outside of the Heritage Foundation. And, everything's bigger in Texas, so we got to have the biggest one here.
Sure.
Been around for almost 40 years. Kind of our grounding mission, or our initial mission, was tort reform and education freedom. And it has grown from those two issues over the last 36 years to pretty much every single issue under the sun, because Texas, what Texas thinks about every single issue is important for the nation and the world. And so outside of some very specific national security issues or foreign policy issues, although we do dabble in some things there, we basically talk about all the major issues, energy, healthcare, certainly education, all those kinds of things. And for me personally, from Texas originally, made my way to DC to start a career. Ended up working for Senator Mike Lee out of Utah. Met some folks over at the Cruz office and got on his presidential back in 2016.
Yep.
And so that didn't go the way that we wanted it to go, but made my way back to Texas to be on that campaign. And then, was just looking around at landing in the right spot, and it was back to think tank world, because I started at the Heritage Foundation and landed back in think tank world at TPPF, and I've been there ever since 2017.
Sweet. Well, I appreciate that's sort of a wild ride. It must be. I always wondered. I mean, I always wondered what it's like to be. on a presidential campaign.
Mm-hmm.
What did you do for the Cruz campaign?
So I was, and in my job in particular, I was the director of rapid response.
Going against Trump in 2016. Rapid response.
That was my job, was to wake up every day and find out who was shooting bullets at us and jump in front of the bullets. And of course, when it came down to the last, couple of us, and it was just us and Trump, fighting those guys. Literally, we would have press meetings in the morning at 7 a.m. and we would talk about what we wanted to talk about that day. And I'd have Fox News on. Trump would call into Fox News and just destroy our entire day, because he would, say something about us or say something about the world or whatever. And it was like, okay, now everybody's responding to what he did. But anyway, honestly, at the time, there was, nobody who worked harder than our campaign to stop Trump from becoming president. We really, really were all behind Ted. But when it came to his reelect, I would have crawled over COVID-covered glass to make sure that Donald Trump was the president, and I cannot be more excited that he's there and doing what he's doing, especially this term. Yeah, just some really wonderful things.
Yeah. So TPPF obviously has a lot that you guys work a lot at on research and education and everything like that. What was sort of the big focus and specific work that y'all did at the 89th Texas Legislature? I guess Sine Die was last Monday.
Yeah. So it's only been a week, and we've kind of decompressed and exhaled. Like I said, our founding issue was education freedom. And so we have been working for 36 years to enable parents to have the right to be able to decide what's best for their children, for their education. And so ESAs, educational savings accounts, and school choice is something we have been working on since our inception. So this is a historic legislative session that we finally got it through. We're now, I think, we're the 33rd or 34th state that has now passed some form of school choice. So it was kind of a national embarrassment that, the conservative Texas was so late on this issue. But the nightmare is over. We now have school choice. But because we're Texas, we, of course, had to do it, the biggest way possible. And so this program will be the largest launch of a universal school choice program in the history of school choice throughout the country. And so 100,000 families will be, at its launch, there'll be 100,000 families that will be eligible. So that was the big headline for us.
Yeah. So I'm curious, you mentioned that TPPF has been working on school choice, school freedom, however we want to word it. You said for 36 years?
36
and
years.
been around for 40 years.
Yeah.
So almost from the beginning. I know that it's been something that's been talked about on the campaign trail. I think Greg Abbott talked about it. I don't know, probably every campaign.
Yeah, for sure.
And last year seemed like our last session, the 88th session, seemed like it was the first real actual effort, like the closest we got. I don't remember it really being in the other sessions. Maybe it was. But for 34 years, I wonder what that was like. You weren't there 34 years ago, but I wonder what that was like 36 years ago, to be pushing for something like that 36 years ago. What was it like in the 90s and the aughts?
Well, they got pretty close. I mean, it's great too, because when we had the signing ceremony, a lot of the old state legislators that had pushed for this in the 90s showed up to the event, and so it was great. But I think they got one vote away in the House. I think somewhere in the mid 90s. I'll have to check my dates on that. But they got really close in the House in the mid 90s, and they were passing school choice. But again, back then it was really a watered down program. You know, I mean, it was really limited to just special ed kids, or very only about 10,000 kids versus now it's going to be 100,000. And so back then it was really just sort of an idea, and it was this idea that was kind of framed as, competition amongst schools, right? Like adding competition. Like if I am, as a parent, am a consumer of education and I can go from one school to the next, then that means the schools will have to compete for my dollars, so to speak. And it was just, I mean, frankly, I don't think I'm hurting anybody's feelings by saying it was just poorly communicated from the get-go that this was about competition, and this was some sort of like trying to prove some kind of economic principle. And I think that's why it really didn't get a lot of traction, throughout the decades, because it didn't really hit home for a lot of people that this was really about parent empowerment, and this was really about freedom and the rights that you have as a parent to choose the best education for your child. Yeah. And that's really when things got started about 5 years ago, when we started to reframe this issue in terms of what it really means for parents and what it really means for students and their opportunity. And so I think that was the big change, that needed to happen in order to get this across the finish line. Yeah.
So I don't know, maybe you've already answered this question, but what would you say is the biggest winner of the 89th Texas Legislature?
Yeah, I mean, that would be the one is parents. I mean, I wrote a piece recently on our website, the Canon Online. Is Texas becoming the best state in the country for parents? Yeah. And I don't think we're there yet, because we haven't implemented our school choice. Florida is very good. I mean, Florida is one of the pioneers in school choice. But in terms of protecting parents' rights, particularly at schools, we just passed our Parents' Bill of Rights, SB 12. Yeah. And although the media would tell you this is this is just an anti-LGBTQ bill, really, if you look at the bill, this opens up, the right of parents to know exactly what's going on with their kids at school. That no longer can administrators hide if there's something going on with kids, if there's any change in their well-being at all, mental health or physical health, if something happens to the kids, schools have to talk to parents and have to bring parents in to the conversation immediately. And so that's a huge win that we just didn't have before this session. So, but there's that. There's also things governing school discipline. We passed a bill. We passed a bill on school discipline this session. There was another bill that banned cell phones during school time, which is another big win for parents and getting kids focused. Just a lot. There was the App Store Accountability Act that protects kids online. We've done a couple sessions now that we've been protecting kids online. So there's a number of things that help give parents the tools they need to fight back against the outside influences on their kids.
Yeah. So would you say the banner legislation for the 89th Texas Legislature, the historians writing textbooks and I don't know, 10, 15, 20, 100 years or whatever, they'll look back and they'll say, it's school choice, or is it the Parents' Bill of Rights? What's the big
100% one? School choice. Yeah. That's the key, because Texas is the crown jewel for the left in keeping school choice away. Yeah. And so now that Texas has quote unquote fallen, as they might say it, there's really no state where you shouldn't have school choice.
Yeah.
And we saw that. I think Kelly Ayotte in New Hampshire just signed a universal school choice bill, and it's really is sweeping. The parent empowerment movement is sweeping the nation, and it's putting school choice in its various forms in places all over the country.
Now, why would Texas be the crown jewel for the left to prevent school choice? Is it the size? Is it the political makeup? Is it their the desire to turn Texas blue?
Yeah.
A little bit of everything.
1 out of every 10 kids in America is taught right here in Texas.
10%.
10% of all the kids in schools, in K through 12 schools, are right here in Texas.
Yeah.
So it's meaningful. Like the policy that we have, our education policy, is incredibly meaningful. And of course, states look to Texas as a leader. I mean, especially red states look to Texas. And part of the reason why Texas didn't pass school choice is because, or at least part of what they say is because the rural areas wouldn't benefit from school choice. And so that kept, that was almost, one of those things that sounded like, oh, well, even Republicans don't support school choice because rural areas. It was never true. We've demonstrated that multiple times, but it was one of those talking points that they could use in places like Iowa and, South Dakota and places like that school choice was really bad for rural Republican or rural parents, which is why even Texas doesn't have it. Well, we proved that that's not true, and of course, I think we got all but 2 Republican votes in the House this time.
Yeah.
So we demonstrated that not only do rural representatives support it, but their constituents do too.
What about property taxes? I mean, that's something that conservatives run on.
Mm-hmm.
They win on. They talk about. Conservative voters talk about all the time.
Yeah.
What happened with the property taxes this session?
Yeah, you're not kidding. We do a ton of polling at TPPF. We probably do 5 or 6 polls a year. We always ask the question of Texans, is our property taxes a significant burden to you and your family? And it always runs about 70% say yes.
Yeah.
This year, for the first time, we got up over 80% of Texans now say that property taxes are a significant burden for their family.
I mean, 70% is already high.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is basically everybody. I don't know for, maybe just, super rich people but even then they're still paying the most in property taxes. But yeah, property taxes is a real burden. There's a lot of really nuanced issues, and I don't know how much you want to get in the weeds here, but the basic concept is, look, the property taxes are levied at the local level, and the state has a lot of power in terms of what it can do in terms of the procedures about how the locals can levy those taxes. But generally, it's hard to get at because the state does not have a property tax. It's not like the state levies a 5% tax and it can lower it to 3% and say, okay, we fixed it. What the state really has to do is buy off the property taxes, and so or phase out. So in other words, if the state can give the locals a bunch of money, that way they can replace the money that they normally would take from you in your property taxes with the money that they're getting from the state. The problem is that the locals know that relief is coming, and they just keep the money, or they raise the taxes to the same level. So if I give you a $600 tax cut, then the locals will just raise your taxes $600 so you don't feel it. Yeah. And that's what's happened. The Senate, Lieutenant Governor Patrick has said that over the last 4 or 5 sessions, they have provided $51 billion in tax relief to Texas property owners. But of course, none of our tax bills are going down. In fact, in most cases, they're going up. Well, how does that happen? Well, that's because the locals come in and change the numbers so that if your taxes went down, they go right back up by about the same amount or more, so that you don't really see it from year to year. Yeah. And it's a real problem. And so we have been highlighting that issue. The governor has now been vocal on that issue. He's been talking about it. Certainly, friend of the podcast, Senator Betancourt, knows about that issue. And so, and the state, frankly, is tired of providing tax relief and not getting any credit for it, right? Yeah. Because, we ask people, who do you blame for your taxes? About half, or for your high property taxes, about half the Texans will say the locals. About 30% still blame the state. Yeah. And the fact is, the state is doing, as much as it can. without being too draconian. Now, it can be draconian. I mean, they can really ramp it up and make it very difficult for the local jurisdictions to raise your property taxes or to levy property taxes at all.
You call that draconian?
Well, I mean, they can make the process so difficult.
Yeah.
They can't, because we're not allowed, the Constitution bars us from having a state property tax.
Yeah.
So in the same way, we can't say, oh, there's a 10% property tax. You can't say there's a 0% property tax. So it's the same thing. So constitutionally, there's some issues with that. Some people may, I'm not a lawyer, so some people may quibble with my analysis there. But generally, the state can't just tell the locals you have to have 0 and we're going to eliminate your property tax. But you can say things like, well, in order to raise taxes, you have to have an election. 60% of the people in the county have to show up and 90% of them have to vote for your tax increase, right? So procedurally, you could make it very difficult for the locals. Now, they haven't made that move because, we're conservative. We believe in prudence. We believe in balance. We believe to some degree in local control and those kinds of things. But at the end of the day, if the locals are not going to respond to the constituents, the state legislators can't just sit around and take a beating. They're going to have to get draconian and get real with the locals and what they're doing.
Yeah, when I spoke with James Quintero on the show, he talked very extensively about different ways that could be tackled. How sort of what you described, local districts are just sort of eating up every single bit of property tax relief that the state can provide. When Representative Briscoe Cain was on the show, he talked about it doesn't matter what he posts on X; it could have nothing to do with property taxes. Someone is going to respond. What are you doing about property taxes?
That's right.
And I see that too, not just in his feed, but other people's feeds and all over the place. And you mentioned, you brought up that they could make it to where, you have to have an election every time you want to raise property taxes. Whatever the numbers are, that could be massaged one way or the other. I think at the State of the State address, Governor Abbott did mention something like that, wanting to have like a 2/3 majority vote for property tax increases or bond increases, all that sort of stuff. Where did that go?
Well, there was a lot of, obviously ESAs were the number one issue, and bail reform became a big issue. I just think it was very difficult to get something across the finish line that was that needed that kind of bandwidth in order to push. Now they did raise the homestead rate, right?
Yeah.
Like they did raise the homestead exemption to $140,000, and that's been raised from $25,000 now to $140,000 over the last couple of sessions. So that's pretty significant.
Sure.
But you're right. It is a very difficult issue. The state feels like they keep doing things and they keep doing things. But they're not getting any credit for it. So I just think it's going to have to get, they're going to have to get a little tougher. The good news is Greg Abbott has recently expressed that, he may run, a school choice-like campaign where he gets very active on this issue, both on the policy side, but then on the political side as well, as he did with school choice. I don't know necessarily what that means, but he sort of told some reporters the other day that he might have to take a harder look at getting really involved on the property tax issue, which would be very welcome.
Yeah, for sure. So was there anything from the 89th Texas Legislature that you would have thought would have passed but didn't? We still have this problem of inappropriate and sexually explicit materials in school libraries and public libraries, and I thought they quashed that in the 88.
It's crazy that we can't get rid of this stuff. It's so. Daniel Alders had a bill towards the end of the session. Representative Daniel Alders, he's a freshman, and all he was trying to do was remove the sexually explicit material or age inappropriate material out of the kids section and into the adult section. Yeah. And then if a minor wanted to check that book out, they had to have the knowledge and consent of their parents, right? Okay. That was all. It wasn't even taking it out of the public library, the taxpayer funded public library, which would be totally appropriate. Just moving it to the adult section. And he got it through the House, although there was a lot of debate over it, apparently. But got it through the House, and then it just didn't make it to the finish line in the Senate. And I don't think it's because of a lack of support. I just think that it wasn't the priority necessarily. So it's, that's kind of a it's a minor issue. It's a big deal if you're a parent and your kids are seeing that stuff. But it's just one of those things that's like, why can't we get rid of this? Like, why can't we get this stuff away from our kids? And And it's just mind-boggling to me that the left will stand up there and defend this time after time. So we've got it mostly. I think we had to go back in and we did pass a law again to strengthen the protections to make sure that this stuff wasn't in the school libraries.
Yeah.
And make sure that parents knew. That's another thing we did in the Parents' Bill of Rights is now anything that a child checks out, that information can be given to a parent if they're requested. So the books are now part of what the parent gets to know. But, public libraries are still unsafe and there's still sexually explicit materials available to minors there. So we'll have to figure that out next time.
So why did some of the GOP priorities fail? And I'm thinking, there's several priorities, but I'm thinking specific. We talked about property tax relief. That's always a GOP priority. Yeah. They did increase the homestead exemption. So I wouldn't necessarily say that they failed. People still complain about the property taxes, but they're doing something about it. And you describe Governor Abbott working towards maybe changing that in the future. But other GOP priorities like taxpayer-funded lobbying just doesn't. This is not the first session that it's failed. I think it's failed several sessions.
Yeah.
And by fail, it just has not passed.
When we started polling this and started looking at this issue a few years ago, there was a problem with kind of the framing of what it was. When we
Do people understand what it is?
They didn't at first. And so when we asked people if they supported taxpayer-funded lobbying or opposed taxpayer-funded lobbying, people sort of assume that was lobbying on behalf of the taxpayer.
Yeah.
Right? Like whatever it is, I want lower taxes or I want, more accountable government. I think
taxpayer-funded lobbyists would argue that that's what they're doing.
No, well, I've also got a piece about that too. But no, so we had to go out there and explain that this was tax dollars going to lobby, on behalf of governments, right?
Yeah.
Of government entities. And government entities want two things. They want more money and they want more authority and more power, which are often at odds with what actual constituents want. Yeah. And so we had to go out and explain that. We really had, over the last couple of sessions, the opportunity to go out and really message that to the people. We were already, once we did that, we were up to 90%. So 90% of Texans oppose their tax dollars going to lobbyists. Every time a school district hires a lobbyist, that's money that could have gone into the classroom. Every time your local government sends a lobbyist up here to Capitol Hill, that's money that could go to public safety or to fix a pothole or whatever. And so people would naturally get that money should be used for public services. It shouldn't be used to pay well-heeled lobbyists in Austin to go up there and wine and dine legislators. So usually you don't have to get too far, from those talking points to explaining people, why this is a bad thing. But if you need to get deeper, people start to understand that, like I said, they're not up there to lobby on behalf of taxpayers. They're there to lobby on behalf of governments who are wanting more money, more spending, higher taxes, all those kinds of things. Blocking school choice. All
blocking
that
property
kind of
tax
stuff.
Reform, perhaps.
Blocking property tax reform or watering it down.
Sure.
Keeping sexually explicit books in libraries. I don't know what they're doing, but it certainly shouldn't be using taxpayer dollars to do that. I think this is an idea whose time has officially come. I think the members really understand it. Certainly the senators. The Senate has passed it. Mays Middleton, Senator Middleton. It was his bill, and he ran it through a couple sessions, and they got it out of the Senate. Didn't really find a real home in the House. Although Ellen Troxclair from this area, I think she was running that bill.
Yeah,
it was one of those things. You've got some former city councilmen, or you got some former mayors, or some former government officials who are now state reps, and they understand. Like they maybe they want to be a taxpayer funded lobbyist at some point. Whenever they get done with their time in government. So there's a lot of nuances to it over in the House. But again, I think this is an idea whose time has come, and then the people are going to be behind it. Certainly, our organization is going to be talking to people about it during the interim and running a very, very public, very aggressive campaign to make this a top issue for the 90th.
Yeah. So, any thoughts on the biggest losers of the 89th Texas Ledge?
Man, it's hard. I wish this wouldn't come off as sounding so partisan, but it's just struck me about what a poor position, what a bad position the Texas Democrats are in.
Why do you say that
right now? Well, I don't know. Like if I'm thinking about it, from a consultant's perspective. Like if you're meeting with members, what do you tell them? What do you tell them is the pathway forward for them? In the state. They literally don't have the ability, they don't have the talent or the bench to run more than one person statewide. There's 6 statewide offices, right? That 6 or 7, depending on what year it is. that run, and they can only ever really be competitive in one. They don't have the money, they don't have the resources, they don't have the bench, they don't have the talent on their side. And somebody explained to me that, that there's not even really an infrastructure for them to even run statewide. There's no consultants. I mean, if you have, say, for example, Colin Allred, who ran against Ted Cruz last time, had to hire out of state because there's just not anybody here. There's no infrastructure really statewide for them. All of the big, they have no ability to stop any of the bills that they really don't like. I mean, obviously they lost on school choice finally after all this time, but any of the so-called anti-LGBTQ bills that they don't like. I mean, everything is passed. We've outlawed men playing in women's sports in both K through 12 and college. We had a huge higher ed bill reform this time that they were unable to do, to stop it all. And so I just don't know, like I'm just, and just not from a partisan perspective at all, but I'm just looking at them like, how do they go back to their constituents? How do they go back to their donors, frankly, and say, we fought the good fight, or we got X, Y, and Z out of this? I mean, the one time that they tried to exert any kind of leverage in the House was trying to stop the bail bill, which of course the bail bill is a huge public safety bill. Yeah. Trying to get murderers and rapists and, child predators off the streets. And they're threatening to hold up that bill because that's the one area where they had the ability, because they need 100 votes to get a constitutional amendment. Yeah. That was the one way that they could, impose any kind of leverage. And it was over a bill that was trying to get rapists off the street. And so I just, I don't, they have new leadership now in the party. And so maybe they're turning some things around. But I just read another article that says, they're going to take a bunch of Soros money and try and run the playbook from 2024 that completely and totally failed. So I don't know. I just they have tough road ahead. Yeah,
still they're still trying to turn Texas purple. Do you think that there's? Do you think that that's what about legislatively? Like any sort of biggest losers come to mind legislatively? I mean, you might say taxpayer-funded lobbying. It's
for sure. Yeah,
that's something that was a GOP priority. Senator Middleton did a great job trying to, get it across the finish line, but just couldn't find purchase wherever, in the House there.
There's, again, like I said, the library bill obviously is one that comes to mind that was bad. The taxpayer-funded lobbying clearly has got a lot of momentum going into next session. So I'm not sure how successful it would have been, just because the public wasn't really behind it yet. And this is one of those bills that needs to have it. But really, we've done so much. I mean, I was asking, we had this same conversation in one of our wrap-up meetings, and it was like, we've done so much on guns in the last 2 or 3 sessions, constitutional carry and everything. We've all but outlawed abortion in the state. I know there was some cleanup bill that they had on the life of a mother this time. But all the social issues, we've gotten the radical gender and racial ideology. We've gotten that out of the schools. All that's been made illegal. We've supported parents, and we're becoming the best state for parents here pretty soon. So it's tough. I mean, elections, right? Yeah. Like elections, we've cleaned up our elections, and we had some really good reforms on that 2 sessions ago. We don't let illegals vote in any of our elections, not even the local elections here, and so. It's hard, it's hard to complain. I don't know. Sure. I know we love the circular firing squad on the right.
And by losing,
spending, you could throw in spending.
Spending. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, the problem with spending is that we are technically, we have the, we have a statute that says you can't spend or can't grow spending faster than population plus inflation, which usually is a meaningful metric that reins in spending, right? Yeah. Like you can't, if your state grows, fine. If inflation goes up, fine. Things cost more. You need to spend more. The problem is Texas population has been exploding, and of course, after Biden, you've got inflation, out the ears. So that hasn't really been in the last few sessions, last few years, a really meaningful spending restraint. Yeah. And so we have probably spent more than we needed to, and of course, all that COVID money came in the last couple of years, and so we do need to have kind of a reckoning on spending because really spending is what drives up taxes as well. So you can talk all day about property taxes, this or that, but all of that is driven by spending. And so we need to have a come to Jesus meeting with our friends on that.
Someone's got to pay all those bills.
Yeah. I mean, you either pay all the bills by raising taxes or you borrow to pay it. And that's a tax on future generations.
Sure.
And so, we need to talk about that issue.
So I think a lot of people, I think regular everyday Texans aren't super familiar with the fact that there's interim sessions and hearings and all sorts of stuff, not sessions, but hearings. Do you have any thoughts about the interim? What's going to be happening? What's going to be going on? And then I want to hear what you have to think about the.
You really want to nerd out if you want to talk about interim charges because that's what we love because that's all the research
this
that
is
gets
called
done.
Texas Talks.
Yeah, we're talking about some really, and we love that. That's the nerdy stuff that I love to talk about on my podcast is because that's all the research that gets done to inform the debate and the issues that are going forward. It also gives you kind of a tell. Obviously property taxes and education and healthcare and all that's going to be part of it. But it also gives you a tell as to what the priorities are for the lieutenant governor and the speaker because they're the ones that set the charges. Based on consultations with their chairman and things like that. And so, like a good example of kind of stuff that comes out of nowhere was the squatter issue. Is that remember there was like these headlines.
The squatter issue is something. It's beyond me that's not just like automatically illegal, but
exactly. And that is exactly what happened. Is that you had all these headlines around the world, right? There was like some crazy situation in England, but there were some situations in New York where these professional squatters were taking over people's property, and you think, oh, that could never happen here in Texas. Well, they did an interim charge and they did research, and they found that even in a place like Texas, where where property rights is almost a cultural right, it's not just the law. It's like our culture here is property rights. There were some real issues, and there are some real problems with professional squatters knowing the law and abusing the law. And so that's something that, again, our friend Senator Betancourt, they did an interim charge. They figured out where the loopholes were in the law, and I think that bill sailed through. The squatters bill, I think, was one of the first ones that was out of both chambers. Yeah. Just because, again, everybody understands property rights are paramount in Texas.
Sure. So what do you expect from interim going forward? I mean, I guess it's. Do you any inkling about what might be going on in it? And it does sort of, like you said, predict the 90th legislature, but, is there something that you'd like to see them work on in the interim?
Yeah, one thing we haven't talked about, which I think is going to be a big push, at least from the House, is healthcare. Yeah, the cost of healthcare and the issues around
health was really big this session.
Health,
with Make Texas Healthy again, or Make Texans Healthy. The big push is there.
Yeah, there's been a lot around transparency, right? Yeah. Like around, it's almost the case now where, anytime that I go to the doctor for any reason at all, it's almost a cultural thing now where the doctors know they need to tell the patients what they're going to pay before they have any services done, whether or not that's in the law or the policy at all. And they've done some really.
Your doctor tells you how much?
They do, yeah. There's been a big push for that, and I
don't think my doctor tells me that.
My dentist lays it all out. Anytime I get a crown or something, like they lay it all out and they tell me. So things are changing. Maybe it's not everywhere, and it's not as prevalent.
Maybe I'm going to the wrong doctor. Maybe
you're going to the wrong doctor, but
maybe mine's not maybe mine has some sort of other doctor, not a medical doctor. Yeah. I don't know. They just say doctor.
Surprise billing is a moral hazard. I mean, you don't want to be charged with surprise billing. If you're a company, you don't want the bad PR of sending somebody a bill for thousands of dollars that they can't pay and all of that. So I think that's why culturally, I think it's more, it's kind of downstream is kind of changing. But I think more importantly, not just sort of empowering patients with knowing more information, but actually creating a real market for healthcare. 85 to 90% of all healthcare is a non-emergency procedure, right? Like you need a hip replacement or a knee replacement. There's no reason why we shouldn't have some kind of exchange or interchange or whatever you call it, where people can go and people can bid for your services, or there can be some kind of understanding about who charges what for what, instead of just doing whatever the insurance company tells you to do. And so I know there's a lot of folks. Representative James Frank is going to probably lead a lot of that charge. Dr. Oliverson in the House has been working on healthcare bills, obviously, with his background. Senator Campbell in the Senate. Very interested in that. And so I'm interested to see what we do on healthcare, because I think there could be a big push to do what we did with education savings accounts and putting parents in the driver's seat.
Yeah.
We need to change the culture so that the insurance companies and the hospital systems are not running and driving policy, that in fact it's being put, empowering patients to drive what the policy is.
So looking ahead at the 90th Texas Legislature, what are you hoping for? I mean, you listed so many things when I talked about we asked you about the biggest, you listed so many things that we've got done. It's hard to pick. I mean, things are so good, right? We love the circular firing squad, but what is we
haven't talked about the border. I mean, that's Texas. We haven't even talked about the border yet, too.
And what's going on in the world, the border is important. I mean, okay, what about the border?
Yeah, so the big reform on the border was this, again, getting nerdy here, this 287G provision, which now requires local law enforcement to collaborate and coordinate with federal officials on the detainment and deportation of illegal aliens. And so right now, before the law was passed, it's just sort of, ad hoc. If the law enforcement, if they pick somebody up that's illegal, they just sort of send them to CBP or wherever, and that's it. But now it enhances the tools that local law enforcement has. It essentially deputizes sheriffs to be able to detain people for being here illegally, and then actually, in some cases, actually deporting them. But it's certainly the real hammer there. And in addition to giving resources to local law enforcement and things, the real hammer is there is that it requires them to work with the feds. So when Tom Homan comes in and says, "I need help," they're required to work with the feds. Which again, you're sort of scratching your head saying, why wouldn't you want to work why wouldn't you want to work to get criminal aliens and off the street and improve public safety? But there was some pushback, and so we ended up, the legislature ended up getting that bill across the line.
So for the 90th legislature, what do you hope for?
Yeah, I mean, people are
Christmas list.
People kind of tired of energy reform. I mean, we had, in 2020.
They're tired of it?
Well, it's that, it's a very difficult issue because it's so complicated, and creating the market and how the grid's going to work and all of that. And there were, after Winter Storm Uri, there was a lot of urgency to fix the grid. And so there were two big reforms following that in 2021 and 2023. And so there wasn't a lot. There was HB 715 or SB 715 this year, which I'm not going to get into the details of, but it was a pretty controversial, not controversial, but it was a step in the right direction, but I don't think it was necessarily what people would consider to be fixing the grid.
Sure.
And so I think there may be another run at making sure that the grid is full of reliable energy. I mean, the real issue is that we have so much wind and solar that's available on the grid, and that's great when it works. When it's windy and it's sunny outside, and then the grid works fine, but of course it's intermittent and we can't control it. And so then we have to have all of the reliable energy, all the fossil fuel energy ready to go as soon as that, as soon as it's nighttime or the wind stops blowing. Anyway, point is that because of the way the system works now, it creates much more expensive energy than it should be.
Yeah.
And so energy costs energy is at the core of every single thing that we do in this state. I mean, we have to have energy to grow our economy, education, everything.
Funds our schools.
The ESF fund, healthcare, everything. I mean, we want to be innovative in AI and Bitcoin and cyber and all that. We have to have energy, and so energy has to be reliable, and it has to be affordable. And right now, it's definitely not as reliable as it should be, and certainly not as affordable as it should be. And so we're doing well in the fact that we have our own grid here, and we're not connected to the rest of the world, which is fantastic. I mean, that's the way that things should be. So we are more reliable than other places, but we could be better, and I think we're doing some things that are kind of stepping on our own toes here.
Yeah. Well, Brian Phillips, Chief Communications Officer at TPPF, I appreciate you taking the time. Is there anything else that you wanted to throw out there about the 89th or the 90th or 91st?
It was historic. I mean, I think it was a historic win, particularly for parents, particularly for education issues. We have a great conservative governor, great conservative legislature. I know people like the firing circle, and not everything got done. But I just want people to remember that we are a conservative state, right? And so when people say, well, we do, why are we doing X, Y, and Z? That's not conservative. Understand that conservative means ordered liberty, right? It's not. This isn't a free for all. This isn't a Wild West. It's not just do whatever you want to do. That's not what liberty means. It's an ordered liberty. Conservative means ordered liberty. Conservative means prudence. It means balance, and that's what we get from the legislature every single year. But even then, within those parameters of being prudent and being balanced in what we what we do, we still get historic reform, and we still lead on things like education and AI and all these things, healthcare and whatever throughout the nation. So, as bad as it is, it's definitely better than any other state. So very proud of the work that we do and the work that the legislature does here.
Well, you want to plug website, social media, podcast you
sure.
mentioned?
Yeah, TexasPolicy.com is our website, and we do a weekly podcast called The Right Idea that you can find on our YouTube channel, and you can find on all the various ways that you get your podcast, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. People still use Apple Podcasts?
I was thinking about that today because Spotify went down, and I was like, now I have to open Apple Podcasts. What is happening?
Yeah, it's called The Right Idea, me and my chief research officer. So it's the comms guy and the research guy getting together talking about Texas, what matters to Texans and Texas policy.
Sure. All right, we'll put the links down in the description below. Brian Phillips, thank you so much.
Thank you.